Chapter 1. A Princess of the Nile. Cleopatra opened her eyes to the warm sun of Egypt. The golden light sparkled on the waters of the Nile River. She lived in a grand palace, filled with marble columns and colorful paintings. Servants moved quietly through the halls, carrying trays of fruits and wine. Outside, the streets of Alexandria buzzed with life. Merchants shouted about silk, spices, and gold. Cleopatra was no ordinary child. She was a princess of the great Ptolemaic dynasty. Her family had ruled Egypt for almost 300 years, but their power came with danger. Rivals waited in the shadows. Trust was rare. Even within the palace walls, secrets whispered through the corridors. From an early age, Cleopatra stood out. She was not just beautiful. She was clever. While other children played, she loved to study. She read books from the great library of Alexandria. She learned Greek, the language of her ancestors, but she also spoke Egyptian, the language of her people. Few of her family had done this before. It made her special. It made her loved. But Cleopatra's life was not all books and learning. She grew up in a time of great uncertainty. The Roman Empire was growing stronger every day. Egypt was rich, and Rome wanted its treasures. Her father, King Ptolemy XIII, was weak. He borrowed money from Rome to stay on the throne. Many Egyptians hated him for it. Rebellion was always near. Cleopatra saw all of this. She watched how her father dealt with powerful men. She noticed the fear in his eyes. She learned an important lesson. To survive, she would have to be smarter than her enemies. One day, when Cleopatra was about 10 years old, a Roman messenger arrived at the palace. He carried a scroll with the seal of Rome. Her father's hands shook as he broke it open. Cleopatra watched him read the letter. His face grew pale. "What is wrong, father?" she asked softly. He looked at her with worried eyes. "Rome is asking for more money. If I do not pay, they may take my throne." Cleopatra's heart raced. She did not fully understand Rome's power, but she could see how afraid her father was. That fear stayed with her. She promised herself she would never show weakness like that. Not to anyone. Cleopatra's mother, Queen Cleopatra V, had died when she was young. Without a mother's guidance, she relied on her own instincts. She listened carefully to the conversations of adults. She asked questions about the world beyond the palace. Some thought she was too bold, but others admired her curiosity. As the years passed, Cleopatra grew more confident. She practiced speaking to large groups of people. She studied the history of Egypt and its gods. She loved the stories of Isis, the goddess of wisdom and magic. Some said Cleopatra resembled the goddess. She smiled at the thought. Maybe one day her people would see her as their living Isis. However, not everyone supported Cleopatra's ambition. Her siblings envied her intelligence and charm. Her brother Ptolemy XIII, just a boy, was her father's favorite. But Cleopatra saw him as a threat. She knew that one day she would have to compete with him for power. In the palace garden, Cleopatra often walked alone, thinking about her future. She looked at the stars and dreamed of greatness. but her dreams were interrupted by the harsh realities around her. Her father grew more desperate each year. Egypt's treasury was empty. Rome's demands never stopped. One evening, Cleopatra overheard a heated argument between her father and his advisors. "The Romans will not wait," one of them shouted. "They will come with their armies. They will take everything." Her father slammed his hand on the table. "Do you think I do not know this? What do you want me to do?" Cleopatra's heart pounded as she listened. She knew then that Egypt's survival depended on more than soldiers or gold. It needed a leader who could outthink Rome, a leader who could charm and persuade, someone strong enough to stand alone. One fateful day, Cleopatra's father decided to leave Egypt. He needed to go to Rome to beg for more support. Before he left, he called Cleopatra to his chamber. She found him sitting by the window, staring at the Nile. "My daughter," he said, "our family's future rests on your shoulders. You are different from your brothers and sisters. You are strong. You must be ready for what is to come." Cleopatra felt a chill run down her spine. She nodded, but said nothing. She understood the weight of his words. When her father left, the palace became even more dangerous. Cleopatra's siblings began to plot against one another. Rumors filled the air. Alliances shifted daily. Cleopatra stayed quiet, watching, learning. She knew her time would come. She just needed to wait. One night, Cleopatra stood on the balcony of the palace. The moon shone brightly over the Nile. She could hear the distant songs of fishermen on their boats. She closed her eyes and imagined herself as queen. Not just any queen, but a ruler who could bring glory back to Egypt. A queen who could stand against Rome and win. She opened her eyes and smiled. "One day," she whispered to the night, "they will all remember my name." But the road ahead would not be easy. Betrayal was close. War was on the horizon. Cleopatra would have to fight for everything she dreamed of. And the world was watching. Chapter 2. The Fight for the Throne. Cleopatra's world changed when she was 18. Her father, King Ptolemy XIII, had died. His throne, once a symbol of power, now became a source of chaos. Egypt's future hung by a thread. As the king's eldest daughter, Cleopatra became queen. But she was not alone on the throne. Cleopatra had to share her rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy III. He was only 10 years old, a child who was easily influenced. His advisors, greedy and ambitious, whispered in his ear. They wanted to control Egypt through him. Cleopatra saw their plan. She knew they did not want her to stay in power. At first, Cleopatra tried to lead as a true queen. She gave speeches to the people. She met with officials and worked hard to keep Egypt strong. The Nile had flooded well that year, and the people hoped for a good harvest. But trouble was brewing behind the palace walls. Ptolemy's advisors began spreading lies about Cleopatra. They told the people that she wanted to rule alone, that she was dangerous. Cleopatra felt the walls closing in. Her allies in the court started to disappear. Some were bribed. Others were too afraid to help her. One evening, Cleopatra sat in her chamber, reading a letter from a trusted servant. The message was clear. The advisors were planning to remove her. They wanted her gone, forever. Cleopatra's heart raced. She knew what happened to rulers who lost power. They were killed or imprisoned. She would not let that happen to her. She had to act quickly. The next morning, Cleopatra walked through the palace gardens. The sun was warm, but she felt cold inside. She could see soldiers watching her from the shadows. They were not there to protect her. They were there to spy on her. She knew she could not stay. That night, under the cover of darkness, Cleopatra left the palace. She disguised herself in simple clothes like a common traveler. With a small group of loyal servants, she fled the city. The desert stretched out before her, endless and harsh. But it was her only escape. Cleopatra rode through the night, her heart pounding with fear and anger. The wind whipped against her face. The stars above were her only guide. As the palace disappeared behind her, she felt a mix of sadness and determination. She had lost her throne. But she had not lost her will to fight. The journey through the desert was not easy. The sun burned during the day, and the cold bit at night. Cleopatra's servants begged her to rest, but she refused. "We cannot stop," she said firmly. "If we stop, they will find us." Days turned into weeks. Cleopatra's small group finally reached safety in Syria. There, she began to plan her return. She sent messengers to gather support. She wrote letters to powerful allies, promising them rewards if they helped her. She knew she could not take back the throne alone. She needed an army. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, Ptolemy's advisors celebrated. They thought they had won. They declared Ptolemy the sole ruler of Egypt. But Ptolemy was just a boy, a puppet in their hands. The people of Egypt began to grow uneasy. They missed Cleopatra's strong leadership. Whispers spread through the city. Some still supported their queen. Cleopatra's chance came when she heard news from Rome. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, had arrived in Alexandria. He was there to settle a dispute between Cleopatra and her brother. Cleopatra knew this was her moment. If she could win Caesar's support, she could take back her throne. But how could she reach Caesar? Ptolemy's soldiers guarded the palace. She could not simply walk in. Cleopatra's mind raced. She needed a clever plan. One night, Cleopatra called her most trusted servant, Apollodorus. "We must get into the palace," she said, "but we must do it in secret." Apollodorus nodded. "I have an idea," he said. "We will hide you in a rug. I will carry it to Caesar as a gift. When he opens it, he will see you." Cleopatra smiled. It was risky, but it might work. The plan was set. The next evening, Apollodorus carried a large, rolled-up rug to the palace gates. The guards stopped him. "What is this?" one of them asked. "A gift for Caesar." Apollodorus replied calmly. The guards hesitated, but let him pass. They had no idea what was hidden inside. Apollodorus carried the rug into Caesar's chamber. The Roman general sat at a large table, studying maps. He looked up as Apollodorus entered. "What is this?" Caesar asked, pointing to the rug. "A gift, my lord," Apollodorus said. He placed the rug on the floor and began to unroll it. As the last layer of fabric fell away, Cleopatra appeared. She rose gracefully, her eyes meeting Caesar's. For a moment, there was silence. Then Caesar smiled. "You are bold," he said. "I like that." Cleopatra knelt before him. "I am here to ask for your help," she said. "My brother's advisors have betrayed me. They have taken my throne. I need your support to restore Egypt to its rightful queen." Caesar listened carefully. He was impressed by Cleopatra's courage and intelligence. She was not like anyone he had met before. He agreed to help her. The next morning, Caesar summoned Ptolemy and his advisors to the palace. They were furious when they saw Cleopatra standing beside him. But Caesar was not a man to argue with. He declared that Cleopatra and Ptolemy would rule together again. Egypt was too important to Rome for its rulers to fight. The Ptolemy's advisors were furious. They left the palace, plotting their next move. The fight was not over. Cleopatra knew this. But for the first time in months, she felt hope. She had returned to Alexandria. She had faced her enemies. And she had won the first battle. As the sun set over the city, Cleopatra stood on the balcony of the palace. The Nile shimmered in the fading light. She took a deep breath. Her fight for the throne was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Her journey had just begun. Chapter 3. The Secret Plan. Cleopatra's throne was in danger. Her brother, Ptolemy X, had declared himself the sole ruler of Egypt. His advisors had forced her to flee Alexandria. But Cleopatra was not the kind of queen who gave up easily. She knew she needed help to take back her crown. Help could only come from one place: Rome. The Roman Empire was the strongest in the world. Its armies were feared, its leaders powerful, and in Alexandria, the most powerful Roman of all had arrived: Julius Caesar. Caesar was in Egypt to solve the problems between Cleopatra and Ptolemy. Rome needed Egypt's wealth and grain. Caesar did not want chaos. Cleopatra knew this. If she could win his support, she could return to the throne. But how? Her brother's soldiers guarded the palace. She could not simply walk in. Every road to Caesar was blocked. Cleopatra sat in her tent outside the city, thinking. The desert wind whispered through the night. Then, an idea came to her. A bold, dangerous idea. "We will not go through the gates," she said to her most trusted servant, Apollodorus. "We will go inside a rug." Apollodorus looked surprised. "A rug?" he asked. "Yes," Cleopatra said with a smile. You will carry me to Caesar hidden inside. When the rug is unrolled, I will be there to greet him." Apollodorus hesitated. "It is risky," he said. "If they find out, they could kill you." Cleopatra's eyes flashed with determination. "I would rather risk my life than let my brother steal my throne." The plan was set. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Apollodorus prepared the rug. It was large and thick, rolled tightly. Cleopatra climbed inside, her heart racing. The air was hot and heavy, but she stayed calm. She had to be brave. Apollodorus lifted the rug onto his shoulders. It was heavy, but he carried it steadily. He approached the gates of the palace, where 2 guards stood. They crossed their spears to block his path. "What is this?" one guard asked, eyeing the rug suspiciously. "A gift for the great Caesar," Apollodorus said, keeping his voice steady. "From Queen Cleopatra." The guards frowned. They whispered to each other. Finally, they stepped aside. "Go in," one said, "but be quick." Apollodorus entered the palace. The halls were grand, lit by flickering torches. The sound of footsteps echoed around him. He kept walking, holding the rug tightly. His arms ached, but he did not stop. At last, he reached Caesar's chamber. The Roman general was sitting at a table, studying a map of Egypt. He looked up as Apollodorus entered. "What is this?" Caesar asked, pointing to the rug. "A gift, my lord," Apollodorus said, setting the rug down carefully. He began to unroll it, layer by layer. For a moment, there was silence. Then Cleopatra appeared, rising gracefully from the rug. Her eyes met Caesar's, and she smiled. "Greetings, great Caesar," she said softly. "I am Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt." Caesar stared at her in surprise. Then he laughed, a deep, booming laugh. "You are bold," he said, "and clever. I like that." Cleopatra knelt before him. "I have come to ask for your help," she said. "My brother and his advisors have betrayed me. They have taken my throne, but Egypt needs a strong ruler. I can be that ruler, with your support." Caesar listened carefully. He could see that Cleopatra was not just beautiful. She was intelligent and fearless. He admired her courage. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. "You make a strong case," Caesar said. "But this is not an easy matter. Your brother will not give up power without a fight." Cleopatra nodded. "I am ready to fight," she said, "but I cannot do it alone. With your help, we can restore peace to Egypt, and Rome will benefit from a loyal ally." Caesar leaned back in his chair, thinking. He had come to Egypt to settle the conflict, not to start a war. But Cleopatra's words stirred something in him. He saw potential in her. She could be a powerful ally for Rome and for himself. "Very well," Caesar said at last. "I will help you. But be warned. This will not be easy." Cleopatra smiled. "Nothing worth having ever is," she said. The next morning, Caesar summoned Ptolemy and his advisors to the palace. They arrived, confident and smug. But their confidence faded when they saw Cleopatra standing beside Caesar. "What is the meaning of this?" one advisor demanded. "She has no place here." Caesar raised his hand, silencing him. "I have decided that Cleopatra and Ptolemy will rule together, as their father wished," he said. "Egypt needs both of its rulers." Ptolemy's face turned red with anger. He glared at Cleopatra, but she stood tall, meeting his gaze without fear. The advisors argued, but Caesar was firm. They could not defy him. Rome's power was too great. In the end, they had no choice but to agree. Cleopatra was queen once again. But the battle was far from over. Ptolemy's advisors left the palace, their minds filled with plans for revenge. Cleopatra knew they would not give up so easily. She would have to stay vigilant. That night, Cleopatra walked through the palace gardens. The air was cool, and the stars shone brightly above. She thought about the risks she had taken, the dangers she still faced. But she felt stronger than ever. She had faced Caesar and won his support. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her throne. As she stood by the edge of the Nile, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." Cleopatra's fight for power was far from over. But she was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 4. The Queen and the General. Cleopatra stood by Caesar's side in the grand palace of Alexandria. She had regained her place as queen, but her throne was not secure. Her brother Ptolemy XIII and his advisors were furious. They had agreed to share power, but they were already planning to remove her again. Cleopatra knew she needed Caesar's help to stay in control. Caesar admired Cleopatra. She was not only beautiful, but also sharp and confident. Together, they made a powerful team. Caesar wanted to bring order to Egypt, and Cleopatra wanted to rule her kingdom without fear. They worked on a plan to defeat Ptolemy and his allies. But Ptolemy would not give up easily. His advisors gathered an army to take Alexandria. Soldiers marched through the streets, and the city erupted into chaos. Cleopatra watched from the palace balcony as smoke rose in the distance. She clenched her fists. This was her city. She would not lose it. Caesar acted quickly. He sent his Roman soldiers to fight back. The streets of Alexandria became a battlefield. Shops burned, and terrified citizens hid in their homes. Cleopatra's heart ached for her people, but she knew this fight was necessary. If they did not win, Ptolemy would destroy everything. Inside the palace, Cleopatra and Caesar worked side by side. They studied maps, planned strategies, and sent orders to the soldiers. Cleopatra's knowledge of the city helped Caesar's men fight smarter. She knew the hidden paths and weak points in the enemy's defenses. One night, as the battle raged outside, Caesar turned to Cleopatra. "Your city is beautiful," he said. "It must be hard to see it like this." Cleopatra nodded. "It is hard, but we must fight for it. Alexandria is my home, Egypt is my life." Caesar looked at her with admiration. "You are a true queen," he said. The fighting grew worse. Ptolemy's army gained control of parts of the city. At one point, they surrounded the palace. Cleopatra stood by the window, watching as the enemy soldiers approached. She felt fear, but she did not let it show. She could not afford to look weak. "We will not give up," Caesar said firmly. "This palace will not fall." As the enemy soldiers moved closer, Caesar ordered his men to set fire to the ships in the harbor. The flames spread quickly, lighting up the night sky. The fire blocked the enemy's advance and gave Caesar's forces time to regroup. Cleopatra watched the blaze, her eyes wide. The city was burning, but she knew it was their only chance. The next day, Ptolemy's forces attacked again. The fighting was fierce. Roman soldiers and Egyptian rebels clashed in the narrow streets. The sound of swords echoed through the city. Cleopatra stayed in the palace, but her heart was with the soldiers. She prayed for their victory. Finally, after weeks of chaos, the tide turned. Caesar's army pushed Ptolemy's forces out of the city. Ptolemy himself tried to escape by boat, but his ship sank in the Nile. He drowned, and his dream of ruling Egypt died with him. When the news reached Cleopatra, she felt a mix of emotions: relief that the battle was over, sadness for the destruction of her city, and determination to rebuild her kingdom. Caesar called for a meeting in the palace. He stood with Cleopatra before the Roman soldiers and Egyptian nobles. "The fighting is over," he announced. "Cleopatra is the rightful ruler of Egypt. She will lead this kingdom into a new era." The room erupted in cheers. Cleopatra felt a wave of pride. She had fought for her throne and won. With Caesar's help, she could now begin to restore Egypt. In the weeks that followed, Cleopatra worked tirelessly. She walked through the city, speaking to the people. She promised to rebuild what was lost. She gave food to those who were hungry and listened to the concerns of the nobles. Slowly, the city began to heal. Caesar stayed in Alexandria during this time. He and Cleopatra grew closer. They spent long evenings talking about politics, philosophy, and the future. Cleopatra admired Caesar's vision and strength. Caesar was fascinated by Cleopatra's intelligence and charm. Together, they dreamed of a powerful alliance between Rome and Egypt. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the Nile, Cleopatra spoke softly. "Do you think Egypt can ever be safe?" Caesar looked at her and nodded. "With you as its queen, I believe it can." Cleopatra smiled. She felt stronger with Caesar by her side, but deep down, she knew their alliance would not last forever. Caesar had responsibilities in Rome. One day he would leave, and she would have to face the challenges of ruling alone. For now, though, Cleopatra focused on the present. She worked to strengthen Egypt's economy, improve trade, and secure her borders. She knew that every decision she made would shape her kingdom's future. The city of Alexandria began to shine again. The people cheered for Cleopatra as she rode through the streets in her golden chariot. They called her the living Isis, a goddess in human form. Cleopatra accepted their praise with grace, but she never let it distract her. She knew there was still much work to do. As the months passed, Caesar prepared to return to Rome. Cleopatra felt a pang of sadness. She knew she owed her throne to him, but she also knew she had earned his respect. He had seen her strength and determination. He had seen her as a true queen. Before he left, Caesar made one last promise. "Rome will always stand with Egypt," he said, "and I will always stand with you." Cleopatra watched as Caesar's ship sailed away. She felt a mix of hope and uncertainty. She had reclaimed her throne, but her journey was far from over. Challenges still lay ahead. But Cleopatra was ready. She had faced fire and chaos and had come out stronger. As she stood on the palace balcony, looking out over her city, Cleopatra whispered to herself, "Egypt is mine, and I will protect it, no matter what." The queen had triumphed, but the story of her reign was just beginning. Chapter 5. A Son for Egypt. Cleopatra's life changed forever when her son was born. The palace was filled with joy. Musicians played, servants danced, and the people of Alexandria celebrated. Cleopatra named the child Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. She claimed he was the son of Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world. For Cleopatra, Caesarion was more than a child. He was the future of Egypt. She dreamed of him growing up to be a great king, a ruler who could protect their land from Rome's greed. She believed Caesarion's bloodline, both Egyptian and Roman, made him special. But not everyone saw it that way. News of Caesarion's birth spread quickly. In Alexandria, the people rejoiced. They saw him as a gift from the gods, a symbol of Egypt's strength. Cleopatra carried him through the streets, and the crowd cheered. Mothers held their children high to see him. Fathers called out blessings for their new prince. But far away in Rome, the news caused suspicion. Caesar already had a wife, Calpurnia. He had no children with her. Some Romans whispered that Cleopatra's child was not truly Caesar's. Others feared what the child represented: a future where Egypt and Rome were tied too closely together. Cleopatra ignored the rumors. She focused on raising Caesarion. She surrounded him with the best teachers. He learned to read and write in Greek and Egyptian. She taught him about the gods and the history of their land. She sang to him at night and told him stories of great kings and queens. She wanted him to know his destiny, to rule. But even as Cleopatra dreamed of Caesarion's bright future, trouble was brewing. In Rome, Caesar was gaining enemies. Many senators believed he was becoming too powerful. They were alarmed by his closeness to Cleopatra. Some saw her as a dangerous foreign queen, using her charm to control him. Cleopatra felt the tension during her visits to Rome. The city was grand but cold to her. The people stared at her with suspicion. Caesar welcomed her openly, but she noticed the frowns of his friends and allies. She wore the finest clothes and jewels to show her power, but it only made the whispers grow louder. One evening, Cleopatra and Caesar sat together in his villa. She held Caesarion in her arms, watching as he played with a golden rattle. "Do you think they will accept him?" she asked softly. Caesar sighed. "They will have no choice," he said. "He is my son." Cleopatra nodded, but doubt lingered in her mind. Caesar's words were strong, but Rome was full of dangers. She knew the senators feared her influence. They did not want Caesar to bring Egyptian customs to their city. She could feel their hostility like a shadow following her. As the months passed, Cleopatra began to worry more. Caesar loved Caesarion, but he was focused on his own ambitions. He wanted to become Rome's first emperor. Cleopatra wondered if his dreams of power would put them all at risk. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra worked to secure her son's future. She strengthened Egypt's defenses and built alliances with neighboring kingdoms. She wanted to make Egypt strong enough to protect Caesarion if the Romans ever turned against him. But she also knew that Egypt could not survive without Rome's support. One day, a messenger arrived from Rome. Cleopatra read the scroll with trembling hands. It was news from Caesar. He had declared himself dictator for life. He was now the most powerful man in Rome. Cleopatra smiled, but her heart felt heavy. Power always brought enemies. She thought of Caesarion, playing in the palace gardens. She had to protect him. But how could she protect him from dangers she could not see? Soon after, Cleopatra received another letter. This one brought terrible news. Caesar had been assassinated. The senators had stabbed him to death in the Senate House. Cleopatra fell to her knees, the letter crumpling in her hand. Caesar was gone. Her protector, her ally, her son's father, dead. The palace was silent. Cleopatra sat alone in her chamber, holding Caesarion close. Tears ran down her face as she thought of the future. Without Caesar, everything had changed. Rome would be in chaos, and she and her son were now more vulnerable than ever. In the days that followed, Cleopatra made a decision. She would not let Caesar's death destroy her. She would fight for Caesarion's place in the world. She declared him co-ruler of Egypt, making him the youngest king in its history. Together, they would stand as symbols of Egypt's strength. But Cleopatra knew the road ahead would be hard. Rome was divided. Caesar's allies, Mark Antony and Octavian, were fighting for power. Cleopatra needed to choose carefully. She had to align herself with the right leader if she wanted to protect her son and her kingdom. As the sun set over Alexandria, Cleopatra stood on the palace balcony. She looked out at the Nile, its waters calm and steady. She held Caesarion in her arms and whispered to him, "You are the future of Egypt," she said. "You are the light of my life. I will do everything to keep you safe." The stars began to appear in the sky, shining brightly. Cleopatra felt a flicker of hope. She had lost much, but she still had her son. And as long as she had him, she would never give up. Trouble lay ahead. Rome was watching. Enemies were waiting. But Cleopatra was ready to face them all. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. The Ides of March. Cleopatra stepped off her grand ship in Rome. The city was loud and full of life. People crowded the streets, eager to see her. News of her arrival had spread quickly. They called her the Queen of Egypt, a woman of beauty and power. Cleopatra wore a golden crown and robes of deep blue. Her jewels sparkled in the sunlight. She wanted to show the Romans that she was no ordinary queen. Beside her stood Caesarion, her young son. The Romans whispered as they saw him. Many believed he was the son of Julius Caesar. Cleopatra held his hand proudly. She wanted everyone to see their connection. She wanted them to know her place in Caesar's life. Cleopatra stayed in Caesar's villa, a grand home just outside the city. It was decorated with Egyptian statues and artwork. Some Romans admired her style. Others found it strange. Cleopatra knew she had to be careful. Rome was not like Alexandria. The people here valued strength, but feared foreign influence. Everywhere she went, Cleopatra dazzled the crowds. She brought treasures from Egypt, gold, spices, and rare perfumes. She hosted banquets with exotic foods and music. Roman nobles came to see her, curious about the woman who had captured Caesar's heart. Cleopatra smiled and charmed them. But beneath her calm exterior, she sensed the tension around her. Not everyone in Rome welcomed Cleopatra. Many senators disliked her presence. They saw her as a threat to Roman traditions. Some whispered that Caesar planned to make her queen of Rome. This idea angered them. Rome had no kings, and they did not want a queen. Cleopatra noticed their cold stares at the Senate meetings. She saw how they whispered behind Caesar's back. She warned him one evening as they sat together in the villa. "Your senators do not trust me," she said softly. "They do not trust us." Caesar looked at her and smiled. "Let them talk," he said. "I am stronger than all of them. They will not dare to act against me." But Cleopatra was not so sure. She had grown up in a world of palace intrigue. She knew how quickly loyalty could change. She watched the senators closely, noting their looks of anger and fear. The days passed, and Cleopatra continued to live like a queen in Rome. But the whispers grew louder. The senators were not only angry about Cleopatra, they were also angry about Caesar. He had declared himself dictator for life. Many believed he wanted to be a king. This idea was too much for the proud Romans. they began to plot against him. Cleopatra did not know the details of their plans, but she felt the growing danger. She tried to warn Caesar again. "Be careful," she said. "Your enemies are closer than you think." Caesar laughed. "Do not worry," he said. "I am surrounded by loyal men. No one will harm me." Cleopatra wanted to believe him, but her heart was heavy. She stayed in the villa, watching and waiting. Caesar continued his duties, meeting with the senators and working to expand his power. Then, on the 15th of March, the Ides of March, everything changed. It was a bright morning. Caesar left the villa early to attend a Senate meeting. Cleopatra watched him go, a strange feeling in her chest. She kissed him goodbye, holding his hand for a moment longer than usual. "Be safe," she whispered. Caesar smiled. "Always," he said, and walked away. Hours passed, and Cleopatra stayed in the villa with Caesarion. She played with her son, but could not shake her unease. The servants moved quietly through the house, sensing her tension. The air felt heavy, as if something terrible was about to happen. Then a messenger arrived. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he handed Cleopatra a scroll. She unrolled it quickly, her heart pounding. The words blurred before her eyes. Caesar was dead. The senators had killed him. They had stabbed him in the Senate house. He had fallen at the foot of a statue, surrounded by men he thought were his allies. Cleopatra dropped the scroll. Her hands trembled. She felt as if the ground beneath her was falling away. Caesar, her protector and ally, was gone. She was alone in Rome, a foreign queen in a city full of enemies. She sat in silence for a long time, holding Caesarion close. The little boy looked up at her with innocent eyes. He did not understand what had happened. Cleopatra's mind raced. What should she do? Where could she go? Without Caesar, her position in Rome was dangerous. That evening, Cleopatra called her advisers together. "We cannot stay here," she said. "Rome is no longer safe. We must return to Egypt." The next morning, Cleopatra prepared to leave. She packed her treasures and boarded her ship with Caesarion. The streets of Rome were quiet as they departed. The people were mourning Caesar, their great leader. But Cleopatra knew that the senators were celebrating. They had gotten what they wanted. As the ship sailed down the Tiber River, Cleopatra stood at the railing, staring at the city fading in the distance. She felt anger rising in her chest. Caesar had been a great man, but he had underestimated his enemies. Now she would have to face hers alone. The journey back to Egypt was long and difficult. Cleopatra spent much of it in thought. She knew that Caesar's death would change everything. Rome was in chaos. His allies, Mark Antony and Octavian, were fighting for power. Cleopatra wondered which of them would emerge as the new leader. When she arrived in Alexandria, Cleopatra stepped off the ship with her head held high. The people welcomed her back with cheers, but she felt no joy. Her heart was heavy with loss. She had loved Caesar, and she had trusted him. Now, she had to face the future without him. That night, Cleopatra sat by the Nile, holding Caesarion in her lap. She looked at the stars above and thought about the challenges ahead. Rome was unstable, and Egypt was vulnerable. She knew she would have to be strong, for her son, for her kingdom, and for herself. "You will be a great king one day," she whispered to Caesarion. "I will make sure of it." The queen had lost her greatest ally, but she was not defeated. Cleopatra was determined to protect her son and her kingdom, no matter what it took. Chapter 7. A New Ally. Mark Antony. Cleopatra sat in her palace, staring at the Nile. Years had passed since Caesar's death, but the pain was still fresh in her heart. Rome was now ruled by 3 men, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. They called themselves the Second Triumvirate. Together, they controlled the empire. But Cleopatra knew that Rome was full of ambition and betrayal. These men would not remain allies forever. Cleopatra had focused on strengthening Egypt. She had rebuilt the economy and secured her borders. But she knew Egypt's future still depended on Rome. Caesarion, her son, was growing into a strong and intelligent boy. She wanted him to inherit a kingdom that could stand tall. For that, she needed an ally. That ally came in the form of Mark Antony. He was one of Rome's most powerful leaders. Antony was bold and confident, with a reputation as a great general. He was known for his charm and love of life. Cleopatra had heard many stories about him, and she was curious. One day, a messenger arrived from Rome. Antony wanted to meet Cleopatra. He had summoned her to Tarsus, a city in the east. Cleopatra saw this as an opportunity. If she could win Antony's support, Egypt would be safer. But she also knew that Antony would not be easy to impress. She would have to make a grand entrance. Cleopatra prepared carefully. She wanted Antony to see her as a queen, a goddess, a woman unlike any other. She ordered a magnificent ship to be built. The sails were made of purple silk, and the oars were covered in gold. The ship was filled with flowers and music. She dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, wearing a golden crown and sparkling jewels. When Cleopatra's ship arrived in Tarsus, the people were amazed. Crowds gathered along the riverbank to watch. The air was filled with the scent of perfume and the sound of harps. Cleopatra reclined on the deck, surrounded by servants. She looked every inch a queen. Antony watched from the shore, smiling. He was impressed. He had heard about Cleopatra's beauty and intelligence, but now he saw her power as well. He sent an invitation for her to join him for dinner. But Cleopatra, always clever, sent a reply. "No, you must dine with me on my ship." Antony laughed at her boldness and agreed. That night they sat together under the stars, feasting on Egyptian delicacies. Cleopatra entertained Antony with her wit and stories. She spoke of her plans for Egypt and her vision for the future. Antony listened, captivated. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," he said. Cleopatra smiled. "And you, Mark Antony, are not what I expected. You are bold, but you are also kind." They talked late into the night. By the end of the evening, they had formed a bond. Antony saw Cleopatra not just as a queen, but as a partner. Cleopatra saw Antony as a powerful ally, and perhaps something more. Over the next few weeks, Antony and Cleopatra spent more time together. They hunted, feasted, and laughed. Antony admired Cleopatra's intelligence and strength. Cleopatra admired Antony's bravery and charm. They became lovers, their relationship filled with passion and ambition. Antony promised to protect Egypt. He gave Cleopatra control of more land, making her kingdom even stronger. Cleopatra, in turn, promised to support Antony in his battles against Rome's enemies. Together, they dreamed of ruling the world. But their love was not without challenges. In Rome, Antony's alliance with Cleopatra caused anger. Many Romans saw her as a threat. They feared she was trying to control Antony, just as they had feared she would control Caesar. Octavian, Antony's rival, used this to turn public opinion against him. "Antony has forgotten Rome," Octavian declared in the Senate. "He has given his heart and his loyalty to a foreign queen." The people of Rome began to question Antony's loyalty. Even some of his allies turned against him. But Antony did not care. He was determined to stand by Cleopatra. One evening, Cleopatra and Antony stood on the balcony of her palace. The city of Alexandria sparkled below them. The Nile flowed quietly in the moonlight. Antony held Cleopatra's hand. "Do you think we can truly rule together?" he asked. Cleopatra looked into his eyes. "Yes," she said, "but it will not be easy. Rome will fight us. They fear what we represent." Antony nodded. "Then we will fight back. Together." But the challenges ahead were greater than they imagined. Octavian was a cunning and ambitious leader. He wanted to control Rome alone, and he saw Antony as his biggest obstacle. He declared Antony an enemy of the state, accusing him of betraying Rome for Cleopatra. In Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony prepared for war. They gathered their armies and built a fleet of ships. Cleopatra provided gold and resources to support Antony's cause. They were determined to stand against Octavian. As they planned their strategy, Cleopatra could not ignore the doubts in her heart. She had risked everything by aligning herself with Antony. If they lost, Egypt could fall under Roman control. But she believed in Antony. She believed in their shared vision. The city of Alexandria buzzed with activity as soldiers trained and ships were prepared. Cleopatra walked among her people, showing them she was strong. "We will not surrender," she told them. "We will fight for our freedom." The people cheered, inspired by her words. Cleopatra's determination gave them hope, but in private, she worried. Octavian's forces were strong, and his propaganda had turned many against them. The coming battle would decide everything. As Cleopatra and Antony stood together looking out over the Nile, Antony spoke softly. "No matter what happens, I am proud to stand by your side." Cleopatra smiled. "And I am proud to stand by yours." The bond between the queen and the general was unbreakable, but the road ahead was uncertain. The world was watching, and the war that would shape their destiny was about to begin. Chapter 8. Love and War. Cleopatra and Mark Antony ruled their world from Alexandria. They lived in luxury, surrounded by gold, jewels, and the finest things Egypt could offer. Together, they held grand feasts in the palace. The tables were covered with exotic dishes, rare wines, and flowers that filled the air with sweet perfume. Musicians played, and dancers performed under the soft glow of lanterns. The people of Alexandria loved their queen and the Roman general. They saw Cleopatra and Antony as gods. She was Isis, the goddess of wisdom and magic. He was Dionysus, the god of wine and celebration. They walked through the streets like rulers of the world, and the people cheered for them. But while Cleopatra and Antony enjoyed their life together, danger was growing. In Rome, Octavian was preparing for war. He wanted to rule Rome alone, and Antony was his biggest rival. Octavian spread rumors, telling the people that Antony had abandoned them. "He is no longer a Roman," Octavian declared. "He is under the spell of a foreign queen." The Roman Senate turned against Antony. Octavian declared him an enemy of Rome. Cleopatra heard the news in her palace. She knew what it meant. War was coming. But she was not afraid. "Let him come," Cleopatra said. "We are ready." Antony agreed. He began to prepare for battle. Cleopatra gave him everything he needed: ships, soldiers, and gold. Together, they built a great fleet. Cleopatra believed in Antony's strength, and Antony believed in Cleopatra's support. They thought nothing could stop them. As they prepared for war, they continued to live in splendor. They threw lavish parties to show their power. At one feast, Cleopatra made a bet with Antony. "I will spend 10 million sesterces on one meal," she said. Antony laughed. "That's impossible." Cleopatra smiled. She brought out a cup of vinegar and a single pearl, the largest in the world. She dropped the pearl into the vinegar, and it dissolved. Then she drank it. Antony was amazed. Cleopatra had won the bet. She had shown Antony and the world that her wealth had no limits, but their focus on luxury blinded them to the dangers ahead. Octavian was building his own fleet. His soldiers were loyal, and his strategy was sharp. He planned to destroy Antony and Cleopatra before they had a chance to strike. The final showdown came at the Battle of Actium. Cleopatra and Antony's fleet faced Octavian's forces in the Ionian Sea. Cleopatra had brought 60 of her finest ships, their sails shining brightly in the sun. Antony commanded the Roman ships. Together, they were confident, but the battle did not go as planned. Octavian's fleet was strong and well organized. His ships trapped Antony's forces, cutting them off from escape. Cleopatra watched from her flagship, her heart pounding. She had never seen such chaos. As the battle raged on, the winds changed direction. Cleopatra saw that their ships were at a disadvantage. She made a difficult decision. She ordered her fleet to retreat. Her ships turned away from the fight and sailed toward safety. When Antony saw Cleopatra's ships retreating, he was torn. He could not leave her. He abandoned the battle and followed her. Together, they sailed back to Alexandria, leaving their army behind. Octavian's fleet celebrated their victory. Antony's forces were scattered and leaderless. The defeat at Actium was a disaster. Cleopatra and Antony had lost their chance to stop Octavian. Back in Alexandria, the mood was heavy. Cleopatra and Antony realized the danger they were in. Their army was gone. Their allies had abandoned them, and Octavian was on his way. Cleopatra tried to stay strong. She focused on protecting Egypt and Caesarion, her son. But even she began to feel doubt. One evening, Cleopatra and Antony sat together in the palace. The candles flickered, casting shadows on the walls. Antony looked at Cleopatra, his face filled with regret. "I have failed you," he said. "No," Cleopatra replied, her voice firm. "We have lost a battle, but we are not defeated. We are still here. Egypt is still here." Antony nodded, but the weight of the loss was clear. He had always been a proud general, but now his confidence was shaken. As Octavian's forces drew closer, Cleopatra began to prepare for the worst. She gathered her treasures and hid them in secret places. She sent messengers to nearby kingdoms, asking for help. But no one was willing to stand against Rome. Antony, too, prepared for the final fight. He trained the remaining soldiers and planned for a last stand in Alexandria. He refused to give up, even as the odds grew worse. In the palace, Cleopatra stayed close to Caesarion. She looked at him and saw hope for the future. "You are my son," she told him. "You are the future of Egypt. No matter what happens, you must survive." The days passed, and the tension in Alexandria grew. Cleopatra and Antony still held each other close, but they knew the end was near. Their love had been powerful, but it had also blinded them. They had underestimated Octavian's strength, and now they were paying the price. One night, as the city slept, Cleopatra stood on the palace balcony. She looked out at the Nile, its waters calm and steady. She thought about all they had lost and all they still had to fight for. Antony joined her, placing his hand on hers. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Cleopatra shook her head. "No, I would rather fight with you and lose than live without you." Antony smiled. "Then we will fight together." But in her heart, Cleopatra knew the truth. Their love was strong, but it could not stop the tide of war. The end was coming, and they could not escape it. Chapter 9. The Battle of Actium. The sea stretched wide and open. The morning sun shone on the water, making it sparkle like glass. Cleopatra stood on her flagship, her eyes scanning the horizon. Around her, 60 Egyptian ships floated in formation, their sails bright and proud. This was her fleet, her pride. Beside them, Mark Antony's Roman ships waited, strong and ready. Ahead of them was Octavian's fleet, It was massive, with hundreds of ships lined up in tight rows. They moved slowly, like a great beast ready to strike. Cleopatra felt a knot in her stomach. This was no ordinary battle. It would decide the future of Egypt, of Antony, and of her son, Caesarion. Antony joined Cleopatra on the deck. His face was serious, but his voice was calm. "Today, we fight for everything," he said. Cleopatra nodded. "And we will win," she said, though her heart was heavy with doubt. The two leaders stood together, watching as the first moves of the battle began. Drums pounded from the Roman ships, sending signals across the water. Orders were shouted. The oarsmen rowed in perfect rhythm, bringing the ships closer to Octavian's forces. The clash began with a roar. Octavian's ships surged forward, their rams striking the first line of Antony's fleet. Soldiers shouted as arrows flew through the air. Cleopatra watched as her ships moved into position. The sound of battle filled the air, wood cracking, swords clashing, and men yelling. At first, Antony's forces held strong. His ships fought back fiercely, pushing Octavian's fleet away. Cleopatra felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps they could win. She looked at Antony, who was commanding his ships with precision. He seemed confident, unshaken. But then the winds began to change. A strong gust blew across the sea, pushing Cleopatra's ships out of formation. The sails flapped wildly, and the oarsmen struggled to keep control. Octavian's fleet took advantage of the chaos. They moved in quickly, surrounding Antony's ships. Cleopatra watched in horror as the tide of the battle turned. The fighting grew more desperate. Smoke rose from burning ships, filling the air with a choking haze. Cleopatra's heart raced. She had never seen such destruction. Men leapt into the sea to escape the flames. The water turned red with blood. One of Cleopatra's captains ran to her side. "We are losing, my queen," he said urgently. "We must retreat." Cleopatra hesitated. She looked at Antony's ships, still locked in battle. She thought of Egypt, of Caesarion, of all they had fought for. But she knew the captain was right. If they stayed, they would be destroyed. "Turn the ships," Cleopatra commanded. "We must save what we can." Her flagship raised its sails and began to move away from the battle. One by one, the other Egyptian ships followed. Cleopatra's heart ached as she watched the chaos behind her. She felt as if she were abandoning Antony, but she had no choice. When Antony saw Cleopatra's ships retreating, he was overcome with emotion. His fleet was falling apart, and now Cleopatra was leaving. He could not bear to lose her. Without thinking, he gave the order to follow her. His ships turned away from the battle, leaving the rest of his forces behind. Octavian's fleet cheered. The battle was over. Antony and Cleopatra had been defeated. Their dream of victory had crumbled. As their ships sailed back toward Alexandria, the mood was heavy. Antony was silent, his face filled with anger and shame. Cleopatra stayed in her cabin, unable to face him. She stared out the window, watching the waves crash against the sides of the ship. She felt a deep sense of failure. Everything they had worked for seemed lost. When they reached Alexandria, the city was quiet. The people had heard of the defeat. They looked to Cleopatra for answers, but she had none. She retreated to the palace, avoiding the crowds. Antony, too, withdrew, spending his days in solitude. Weeks passed, and the weight of the loss grew heavier. Antony's soldiers began to desert him, leaving to join Octavian's forces. Cleopatra's allies turned away, no longer trusting her strength. The once great couple found themselves isolated, surrounded by enemies. One evening, Cleopatra went to Antony's chambers. He sat alone, staring at a map of the world. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes were filled with despair. "I failed you," he said quietly. Cleopatra shook her head. "No," she said, "we failed together, but it is not over." Antony looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "What can we do?" he asked. "Octavian's forces are too strong." Cleopatra took a deep breath. "We must be smart," she said. "We must protect Egypt and Caesarion. We cannot let Octavian take everything." Antony nodded, but his spirit was broken. The once proud general seemed like a shadow of himself. Cleopatra felt a pang of sadness. She had always admired Antony's strength, but now she saw his weakness. As the days went on, Cleopatra began to prepare for the worst. She hid her treasures in secret chambers and sent Caesarion to a safe place. She cayed them, but Cleopatra would not give up. Not yet. This chapter, Cap knew Octavian would come for them, and she wanted to be ready. But deep down, she feared there was no escape. The defeat at Actium had changed everything. Cleopatra and Antony were no longer seen as powerful rulers. They were seen as defeated lovers, clinging to a dream that had slipped through their fingers. The world watched, waiting for the end. As Cleopatra stood on the palace balcony, looking out at the Nile, she felt a deep sense of loss, but she also felt a spark of determination. She was still the queen of Egypt. She still had her son, her people, her pride. She would fight to the end. Chapter 10. The Fall of Alexandria. The city of Alexandria held its breath. The news had arrived. Octavian was marching toward them. His army was strong, disciplined, and determined to crush Antony and Cleopatra. Inside the palace, Cleopatra walked the halls, her mind racing. She had faced danger before, but this was different. This time, the enemy was unstoppable. Cleopatra stood on the balcony, looking out over the city. The streets were quiet. The people stayed in their homes, afraid of what was coming. Alexandria, the shining jewel of Egypt, was under threat. Cleopatra clenched her fists. She had fought too hard to lose it all now. Antony was in the palace too, but he was not the man he used to be. After the defeat at Actium, his spirit had broken. His soldiers no longer trusted him. Many had deserted to Octavian's side. Cleopatra watched Antony sit alone in his chambers, staring at nothing. She tried to talk to him, to remind him of the strength they once shared, but Antony only shook his head. "It's over," he said quietly. "We have lost." Cleopatra refused to believe it. She still had hope. Egypt was her land, her heart. She would not let it fall without a fight. She began preparing the city for war. She called her advisors together and gave orders to strengthen the defenses. The walls were fortified and supplies were gathered. Cleopatra wanted to show Octavian that Egypt would not surrender easily. But betrayal was everywhere. Cleopatra's spies brought her troubling reports. Some of her allies were making deals with Octavian. They believed he would win and wanted to save themselves. Cleopatra felt her heart sink. She knew that loyalty was rare in times like these. One night Cleopatra sat with Caesarion, her son. He was no longer a little boy. He was growing into a young man, strong and brave. Cleopatra looked at him, her eyes full of love and fear. "You must survive," she told him. "No matter what happens to me, you must live. You are the future of Egypt." Caesarion nodded, but he didn't want to leave her. "I will stay and fight with you," he said. Cleopatra shook her head. "No, you must go. If Octavian captures you, he will use you as a symbol of his victory. I will not let that happen." Cleopatra made arrangements for Caesarion to escape. She sent him to a safe place, far from Alexandria. As she watched him leave, tears filled her eyes. She felt as if a part of her was being taken away. But she knew it was the right decision. Her son's life was more important than anything else. Meanwhile, Octavian's army grew closer. His soldiers surrounded Alexandria, cutting off the city from the outside world. Inside the palace, tension filled the air. Cleopatra tried to stay strong, but the pressure was immense. She knew the city could not hold out forever. Antony tried to rally his remaining troops, but their numbers were too small. His confidence was gone. Some days, he barely spoke. Cleopatra watched him with sadness. This was the man she had loved, the man who had once stood beside her like a god. Now, he seemed lost. The final blow came when Antony's most trusted general betrayed him. The general surrendered to Octavian, taking with him the last of Antony's army. Cleopatra received the news in the early morning. She sat in silence, feeling the weight of defeat. There were no soldiers left to fight. The city was defenseless. Octavian sent a message to Cleopatra. He demanded her surrender. Cleopatra read the letter carefully. She knew that if she gave up, Octavian would take her to Rome as a prisoner. He would parade her through the streets as a trophy, a symbol of his power. Cleopatra could not let that happen. She was a queen, not a trophy. In her private chamber, Cleopatra made a plan. She gathered her closest servants and gave them instructions. She wanted to be ready for whatever came next. She prepared her most valuable treasures, hiding them in secret places throughout the palace. If Alexandria fell, at least her legacy would survive. As the sun rose over the city, Cleopatra stood by the window, watching the Nile. The water was calm, but the air was heavy with tension. She felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. She had done everything she could. Now, she could only wait. Antony, meanwhile, was overcome with despair. He believed Cleopatra had already surrendered to Octavian. His heart broke at the thought. Unable to face the shame, Antony took his own life. Cleopatra found him moments later lying on the floor of his chamber. She cried out in grief, holding him as he took his last breath. The palace was silent. Cleopatra felt as if the world had stopped. She had lost Antony, her partner, her love. But there was no time to mourn. Octavian's soldiers were at the gates. The city was about to fall. Cleopatra retreated to her chamber, surrounded by her servants. She dressed in her finest robes and placed her golden crown on her head. She wanted to meet her end as a queen, with dignity and pride. She refused to let Octavian humiliate her. When Octavian's forces entered the palace, they found Cleopatra seated on her throne. She looked calm, almost regal. Octavian himself approached her, offering words of false kindness. "You are a worthy opponent," he said. "Now, you must come with me to Rome." Cleopatra met his gaze, her eyes full of defiance. "I will never be your prize," she said. The Queen of Egypt had faced her greatest challenge. She had lost her city, her love, and her army. But she had not lost her pride. As Octavian prepared to take her to Rome, Cleopatra began to think of her final move. She was not finished yet. Chapter 11. The Last Queen's Choice. Cleopatra sat in her chamber, the weight of the world on her shoulders. News of Antony's death had shaken her to her core. He had believed she was dead, a cruel misunderstanding that led him to take his own life. Now, she was truly alone. Her heart ached with sorrow. Antony had been her partner, her love, her ally in this fight. Without him, the world felt emptier. But Cleopatra knew she could not collapse under her grief. Octavian was waiting. She had to decide what to do. Octavian had sent word to her. He promised she would be treated fairly if she surrendered. Cleopatra did not trust him. She knew his true plan. He wanted to take her to Rome, parade her through the streets as his prisoner, and show the people of Rome that he had conquered Egypt. Cleopatra stood by the window, looking out over Alexandria. The city had fallen. Its streets were quiet, its people subdued. The once great capital of Egypt was now under Roman control. Cleopatra felt anger rise within her. She had fought so hard for her kingdom, for her son, for her people. She could not let it all end in humiliation. She called her advisors and closest servants together. "We must think carefully," she said. "Octavian will not stop until he has taken everything. I cannot allow Egypt's queen to become his trophy." Her advisors spoke in whispers, afraid of what was to come. They knew Cleopatra's position was dire. One of them suggested negotiating with Octavian again, offering treasures or land in exchange for her freedom. But Cleopatra shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "He does not want gold or land. He wants power. He wants me as a symbol of his victory. I will not give him that." Cleopatra began to prepare for her final move. She sent messengers to Octavian asking for a private meeting. She hoped to negotiate one last time to protect her son and her legacy. When Octavian arrived, he entered the palace with a cold, calculated air. His victory was complete, and he knew it. Cleopatra met him in her throne room, dressed in her finest robes. She wore her crown, her jewels, and a calm expression. Octavian looked at her with a mix of admiration and control. He knew he had won, but he could not help but respect the woman who had stood against him. "Queen Cleopatra," he said, his voice smooth. "Your fight is over. Surrender to Rome, and I will ensure you are treated fairly." Cleopatra studied him carefully. She saw the ambition in his eyes, the hunger for power. She knew he would never let her live freely. His promises were empty. He wanted her as a prisoner, a symbol of his triumph. "I have one request," Cleopatra said. "Let my son Caesarion live. He is young and innocent. He has no part in this war." Octavian gave a small smile. "I will consider it," he said, but Cleopatra knew he was lying. The meeting ended, and Octavian left the palace. Cleopatra returned to her chamber, her mind racing. She could not trust him. She could not let him control her fate. She had to act. Cleopatra ordered her servants to bring her treasures, gold, jewels, and silks. She had them placed around her chamber, creating an image of wealth and power. If she was going to die, she wanted to die as a queen. She sent one final message to Octavian, inviting him to the palace to discuss terms. But in truth, Cleopatra had no intention of surrendering. She had made her choice. She would not live as a prisoner. She would not be paraded through Rome like a conquered slave. In secret, Cleopatra had asked her servants to bring her a basket of figs. Inside the basket, hidden beneath the fruit, was a small but deadly snake, an asp. Its bite was quick and painless, a way to escape the humiliation Octavian had planned for her. As night fell, Cleopatra sat in her chamber. The room was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. She thought of her life, her victories, her struggles, her loves. She thought of Antony and how he had died believing she was gone. She thought of Caesarion, her son, and prayed he would find safety. Cleopatra took the basket in her hands. The snake moved silently inside. Her servants stood nearby, their faces filled with sorrow. They loved their queen, but they understood her choice. Cleopatra looked at them and gave a small smile. "Do not be sad," she said softly. "I am going to meet Antony." She reached into the basket and took the asp in her hand. The snake coiled around her arm, its movements smooth and calm. Cleopatra raised it to her chest. The bite was quick, a sharp sting that faded almost instantly. She let the snake fall back into the basket. Her servants rushed to her side, tears streaming down their faces. Cleopatra leaned back, her breathing slow. She felt a strange peace wash over her. She had taken control of her fate. Octavian would not have her. She was still a queen, even in death. When Octavian's soldiers entered the chamber the next morning, they found Cleopatra lying on her golden bed, dressed in her finest robes. Her crown rested on her head, and her face was calm. Octavian stared at her, his victory soured by the sight. Cleopatra had denied him the triumph he so desperately wanted. The Queen of Egypt was gone, but her legend had just begun. Cleopatra's choice ensured that she would be remembered not as a prisoner, but as a ruler who refused to bow. Her story would echo through the ages, a tale of courage, love, and defiance. Chapter 12. A Legacy of Power. Cleopatra's death was the end of an era. With her gone, Egypt fell under Roman control. Octavian became the first emperor of Rome, taking the name Augustus. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for centuries, was no more. Egypt was now a province of Rome. But Cleopatra's story did not end there. Her life, her choices, and her courage became a legend. People spoke of her beauty, her intelligence, and her determination. In the years that followed, Cleopatra became one of the most famous figures in history. The people of Egypt mourned their queen. Cleopatra had fought to protect her kingdom. She had ruled with wisdom and strength. She spoke to her people in their own language, a rare act for a Ptolemaic ruler. Many Egyptians saw her as more than a queen. They saw her as a goddess, the living Isis. Octavian may have taken her throne, but he could not erase her memory. Stories of Cleopatra spread across the empire. Romans whispered about the powerful queen who had defied their leaders. Some admired her, others feared her legacy. But no one could forget her. Historians began to write about Cleopatra's life. They wrote of her meeting with Julius Caesar, her alliance with Mark Antony, and her tragic end. Some focused on her beauty, but those who looked deeper saw her true strength, her intelligence, and her will to survive. Cleopatra was more than a queen. She was a leader who loved her country. She fought to keep Egypt free, even when the odds were against her. She used her charm and wit to form alliances. She dared to stand against the most powerful empire in the world. Even her death was an act of defiance. Cleopatra chose to die as a queen rather than live as a prisoner. By doing so, she denied Octavian the victory he wanted. She turned her defeat into a moment of power. The image of Cleopatra, dressed in her royal robes, lying peacefully on her golden bed, became a symbol of dignity and strength. Cleopatra's life has inspired countless stories, plays, and films. Writers and artists have imagined her as a heroine, a seductress, a warrior, and a tragic figure. Her name has been spoken with awe for more than 2,000 years. But who was Cleopatra really? She was a woman who lived in a world ruled by men, yet she managed to rise above them, using her intelligence and determination to shape her destiny. She was a mother who loved her son, Caesarion, and dreamed of a future where he would rule a strong and free Egypt. She was a queen who never gave up, even when the odds were against her. Cleopatra's story is also a reminder of the challenges she faced. She lived in a time of war and betrayal, where trust was rare and danger was everywhere. She had to make difficult choices, often sacrificing her own happiness for the good of her kingdom. She was not perfect, but her courage made her unforgettable. As you think about Cleopatra, what will you remember most about her? Will it be her cleverness, her strength, or her love for Egypt? Will it be her boldness in meeting Julius Caesar, or her tragic romance with Mark Antony? Or will it be the way she chose to end her life, refusing to let her enemies define her? Cleopatra's legacy lives on because her story is timeless. She reminds us of the power of determination, the importance of courage, and the beauty of hope. She teaches us that even in the face of defeat, we can choose how we are remembered. Egypt changed forever after Cleopatra's death. It became part of Rome, and its traditions began to fade. But Cleopatra ensured that her culture, her people, and her spirit would not be forgotten. Her name is still spoken with respect and wonder, a symbol of strength and leadership. The Nile continues to flow, just as it did in Cleopatra's time. The pyramids still stand, watching over the land she loved, and the story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, still inspires us today. What will you take from her story? Perhaps it is her bravery. Perhaps it is her intelligence. Or perhaps it is her belief that even one person can make a difference. Cleopatra's life was filled with challenges, but she faced them all with grace and strength. She was a queen who loved her people, a mother who loved her son, and a leader who fought for her country. She may have lived thousands of years ago, but her legacy is timeless. And so, as the world moves on, Cleopatra's name remains. A name that stands for power, for courage, and for the enduring spirit of a queen who refused to be forgotten.